The Bible reading, we've got two today. The first one is from 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 1 to 7 and 11 to 16. When King David was settled in his palace and the Lord had given him rest from all the surrounding enemies, the king summoned Nathan the prophet. "Look," David said, "I am living in a beautiful cedar palace, but the ark of God is out there in a tent." Nathan replied to the king, "Go ahead and do whatever you have in mind, for the Lord is with you." But that same night the Lord said to Nathan, "Go and tell my servant David, this is what the Lord has declared. Are you the one to build a house for me to live in? I have never lived in a house from the day I brought the Israelites out of Egypt until this very day. I have always moved from one place to another with a tent and a tabernacle as my dwelling. Yet no matter where I have gone with the Israelites, I have never once complained to Israel's tribal leaders, the shepherds of my people Israel. I have never asked them, 'Why haven't you built me a beautiful cedar house?'" And verse 11 on. "Furthermore, the Lord declares that he will make a house for you, a dynasty of kings. For when you die and are buried with your ancestors, I will raise up one of your descendants, your own offspring, and I will make his kingdom strong. He is the one who will build a house, a temple for my name, and I will secure his royal throne forever. I will be his father and he will be my son. If he sins, I will correct and discipline him with the rod like any father would do. But my favour will not be taken from him as I took it from Saul, whom I removed from your sight. Your house and your kingdom will continue before me for all time, and your throne will be secure forever." And the second reading is from Ephesians chapter 2, verses 19 to 22. "Consequently, you are no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people, and also members of his household, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Christ Jesus himself as the chief cornerstone. In him the whole building is joined together and rises to become a holy temple in the Lord. And in him you too are being built together to become a dwelling in which God lives by his Spirit." This is the word of the Lord.
Right, well, going through the sermon that Deborah had prepared for this morning, she decided to start off pretty strong with an analogy that I'll need help from all of you on. Crocodile Dundee is how she decided to start today's sermon. There's an iconic scene in the movie where Dundee, or Paul Hogan, is walking through New York City and a gang tries to rob him. One of the thugs pulls out a knife and demands Dundee's belongings. Calmly, Dundee pulls out an enormous knife. What does he say? "That's not a knife. This is a knife." Similarly, in our text today, God says to King David, "David, that's not a house. This is a house." King David is called a man after God's own heart, a title God himself gives him. In Acts 13:22, God said about David, "I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. He will do everything I want him to do." That's a big honour for David, but does he really deserve it? David made some serious mistakes. He didn't discipline his son Amnon, which led to Absalom's rebellion. He countered his army, which upset God and caused a plague. He mishandled the Ark of the Covenant, leading to Uzzah's death. And he had an affair with Bathsheba, which caused major problems and led to a murder of an innocent man. He wasn't perfect. So how could David still be called a man after God's own heart, even though David made big mistakes? Well, it's because his heart was truly dedicated to God. Being a person after God's own heart doesn't mean being perfect. It's near impossible for us as humans. It means being sincere in seeking God, admitting when you're wrong and striving to live the way he wants. David's genuine repentance and his effort to follow God, even when he messed up, shows a heart that really seeks him. We see today, reading from 2 Samuel 7, David had just finished building his palace and everything was going well. He was at peace and enjoying life. But something bothered him. He saw the ark of the Lord was still in a simple tent while he was living in a grand palace, and he thought, this isn't right. I need to do something about this. Let's pause here to watch a video clip about the ark of the Lord to help you understand the bigger picture. Thank you.
A crowd of people danced toward the entrance to Jerusalem, singing joyfully. And leading the way, wearing a simple vest, rejoicing wildly, is none other than King David himself. And David capers with all his might before the Lord. And David is wearing a cloth cloak. And David and all of Israel bring up the ark of the Lord with the trumpeting of ram's horns. What a celebration! The moment when King David brings the ark to Jerusalem is possibly the happiest moment of his life. Truly a dream come true. But why? Why does it mean so much to David to bring the ark to Jerusalem, to place it in his seat of government, in the capital city? What's so special about this ark? In order to uncover the secrets of the mysterious ark, I suggest a brief journey through time, following the ark and the stories it has to tell. What do you say? Let's go. The ark was built in the desert and contains the tablets of the law, 2 stone tablets given to Moses on Mount Sinai, engraved in God's hand with the 10 Commandments. The essence of the Israelite faith. Tradition tells us that the ark went before the Israelites in the desert and protected them from enemies and dangers. The climax occurs when the Israelites stand before the Jordan River. The Jordan is raging, and there's no way across. But when the ark is brought down to the river, the water rises up like a wall, and the Israelites cross the Jordan. And the Kohanim, bearers of the ark, stood in the middle of the Jordan. And all the Israelites passed through until the entire nation had crossed the river. After years of wandering, the ark rested in the tabernacle of Shiloh, and there closely guarded for centuries. But then, the Israelites go to war against the Philistines. In the battle of Eben Haezer in what's now Rosh Hashanah, the Philistines strike the Israelites a heavy blow. Thousands of soldiers are killed, and the Israelite army is in trouble. Some suggest using the doomsday weapon, the Ark of the Covenant. The ark is brought to the battlefield. The Israelite camp cheers, and the Philistines, they shake with fear. But to the surprise of both sides, the Philistines win the battle once again. And it doesn't end there. The venerated sacred ark is captured by the enemy. The Philistines danced in the streets. They were overcome with joy. They had never even dreamed of such a prize. But then, deadly plagues break out, and inexplicable deaths occur in Philistine cities, such as Ashdod, Gath, Ekron. The Philistines regret ever taking the Israelite ark and look for a way to get rid of it. One day, out of the blue, the people of Bet Shemesh saw a cart approaching the city. And what's on the cart? The ark, returning from captivity with no negotiations or conditions. The people of Bet Shemesh were thrilled to see the ark, but it turns out even native Israelites didn't always know what to do with it. A plague spreads through town. The people of Bet Shemesh quickly send it to Kiryat Yearim until a proper place for it is found. But what is the proper place? This is where King David comes in. For years he dreamt of finding that place. He swears, "I will not enter my tent or home or lie in my bed or let my eyes shut or rest, until I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling for Jacob's master. Finally, the longed-for moment arrives. David captures Jerusalem from the Jebusites and makes it the official capital of Israel. Now the ark has a place of honor. Let's put it here. David, along with hundreds of thousands of Israelites, go to Abinadab's house in Gibeah to bring the ark up from there. Abinadab's two sons, Uzzah and Ahio, are given the tremendous honor of driving the cart. But then, just before they get there, in a place called Goren Nachon, Uzzah, worried that the ark is about to fall off the cart, reaches out, grabs the ark, and dies on the spot. The festive parade turns into a funeral procession. David stops the celebration and sends the ark to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The months that the ark spends in his house are a time of blessings and good fortune. David hears the good news and decides to try again. This time, nobody was hurt. Thank you for asking. The ark was carried by the Levites in rapturous joy, with singing, dancing, and music. King David himself dances and celebrates with the nation before God. The ark finally arrives in Jerusalem and is placed in a special tent in the king's courtyard. Jerusalem, the national center of the kingdom, becomes the spiritual center as well. The end of the journey? Not yet. David dreamt of building a magnificent temple to house the ark. But the Bible tells us that because of David's military past and all the blood he spilled, he wasn't permitted to build the temple. David's dream would be fulfilled, however, and the temple would be built on Mount Moriah by his son Solomon. Then Solomon gathered the elders of Israel, all the heads of the tribes, the princes of the Israelites, unto himself in Jerusalem, to bring up the ark of the Lord from the city of David, which is Zion. The ark was brought up with great ceremony and awe into the Holy of Holies, the most important place in the temple. We may never know all the secrets of the ark, but one thing is for sure. For the first time in human history, a temple was built, and at its heart was neither a statue nor an image, but a concept, words that express the fundamental values of the Israelite people, and in fact, the entire world.
Thank you. In ancient Israel, kings and prophets worked closely together. When King David wanted to build a temple, he told prophet Nathan about his plan. The idea seemed great, noble, and respectful. Nathan quickly agreed, saying, "Sounds wonderful, go ahead." This situation is a lot like what happens in our own lives. We often rush to make plans, thinking they must be right just because they seem good or they sound like a good idea. We might be really excited about our plans and then get approval from others, but that's not always what God means. G.K. Chesterton, he's an English writer and thinker, he once said that the problem with the world is that we are all in such a hurry to do things and to prove that we are doing things that we often forget to stop and ask ourselves if we are doing the right things. Now, just as a side note, G.K. Chesterton was around in the 1800s, and it's amazing to know that human nature doesn't really change all that much, even in the space of 200 years, despite how quickly society moves. His quote reminds us that we can get so busy and focused on doing something that we forget to check if it is really the right thing to do. Just like Nathan quickly agreed with David's plan without asking God first. We might rush into our own ideas without seeking God's guidance. Even if our plans seem good, they might not be right for the moment. It's important to make sure that it's not just that we're doing the right things, but we're also doing them at the right time. Take the story of George Mueller as one example. He needed to expand his orphanage to give the children more space and better conditions. Sounds like a pretty good thing to do. But he didn't have enough funds and the need was urgent. Instead of rushing into action or making any hasty decisions, Mueller took time to pray and really seek God's guidance. After much prayer, he decided to wait. During this waiting period, Mueller continued to trust in God's provision, and eventually God provided the funds through really unexpected sources, as he often does. Mueller was able to get the building at just the right time, and the expansion was successful. Mueller's story shows us the importance of balancing immediate needs with really thoughtful prayer and trust in God's plan. Even when facing urgent needs or tough decisions, taking time to seek God's guidance and waiting for his timing can lead to the best outcome that also aligns with his will. Even though David and Nathan were excited about building the temple, God had a different plan. That night, God told Nathan, N-O, no. Was David's plan wrong? Not at all. God was happy with David's desire to honour him, but God had other plans. Even when our plans come from a good place and have the best of intentions, we need to stay pretty flexible because God's purposes can be much bigger than what we understand today. There's a biblical scholar by the name of John Goldingay, and he said, God's problem with us, I'm sure there are many, but God's problem with us is that we like to tie God down. God likes being on the loose. What he means is that we often try to fit God into our own ideas and our schedules. We want God to work the way we expect him to work and within our timelines. When the famous missionary William Carey, who was a British shoemaker with a passion for mission, went to India, he had a clear plan to spread the gospel in India. But when he first arrived in India, things didn't go as smoothly as he had planned. Again, a good idea. Despite numerous difficulties, including resistance, illness, and financial struggles, Carey remained committed to his mission and adapted to the circumstances that he faced. Over time, Carey's work had a profound impact in India. God is the one who is in the lead. God's plans often surpass our own, even when things don't go according to our own expectations. God's work can unfold in ways we couldn't have ever imagined. By trusting in his greater plans and staying open to his guidance, we allow his will to shape our lives in amazing and unexpected ways. So, for David, and in this story, what was God's bigger plan? When God asked David, "Are you the one to build a house for me?" the answer was no. God reminded David that he is in charge. He chose David from very humble beginnings, protected him through battles, and guided his people. God was the one leading the way. David just wasn't the right person to build the temple because he had been involved in so many wars, as we saw in the film, and he shed a lot of blood. Building the temple needed someone who could bring peace, and Solomon was the person for that job. But God had an even bigger plan. He wasn't just interested in a grand physical building. The new temple of God he had in mind isn't a building at all. It's a living spiritual reality. With the coming of Jesus Christ, God's dwelling took on a new and transformative dimension. Jesus declared, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days," referring to his own body. Through his resurrection, the ultimate house of God was revealed. Not a building, but a living, dynamic presence in and among his people. As the Apostle Paul says in Ephesians 2:19-22, believers in Christ are now the temple, where God lives by his Spirit. Jesus is the new cornerstone of this new temple, and through him, God connects with people in a new way. This new temple isn't about a physical place, but is present in the hearts and lives of those who follow Christ. Pastor Richard Wurmbrand, he was a Romanian Christian minister, was imprisoned and tortured for his faith under the communist regime. In 1948, he was arrested and spent 14 years in prison. Despite the brutal treatment, Wurmbrand never lost his faith. Isn't it incredible? In the darkest cells, he discovered a profound truth. that God's temple is not confined to any building. It is within the hearts of believers, and that's what kept him going. During his imprisonment, Wurmbrand prayed. He sang hymns like we did this morning and recited Bible verses from memory. His cell became a place of worship, demonstrating... what did he demonstrate? One moment, please. Demonstrating God's presence can dwell in any circumstance. When Wurmbrand was released, he continued to share his testimony, showing that God's plans exceed our expectations and provide strength and hope in the most unlikely places. Through his suffering, Wurmbrand illustrated that the true temple of God is within us and that his Spirit brings peace, comfort and joy regardless of what happens externally to us. This real-life example reinforces the idea that God's ultimate plan is to create a living, vibrant relationship with his people, dwelling within their hearts and lives. When God told David that his plan to build a temple wouldn't happen, David accepted it and didn't let his disappointment stop him. He decided to prepare everything needed for the temple, even though he wouldn't be the one to build it. He wanted to support God's plan and make sure everything was ready for the future. When our plans face setbacks or God closes doors, we should handle it positively, like David did. I know it's easier said than done. Recognise that God's plans are always better, be thankful and trust that he's working things out. Instead of focusing on what we can't do and what we're not allowed to do, let's focus on what we can do and give God glory for that. Just as David's job was to set up the kingdom and get ready for the temple, while Solomon's job was to actually build it, each of us has a part in God's bigger plan. We might not always understand why things happen the way they do, but it's important to trust that God's plan is perfect and that he's guiding us in the right direction. Even if we don't see the whole picture, we should follow God's will and be open to his guidance. And by doing this, we can play a really important role in his greater purpose, just as David did. Dear friends, David's plan to build the temple was good. It was great. But God had an even greater vision, a living temple in our hearts through Jesus. Let's align our lives with God's bigger plan. Let's trust his guidance and focus on what we can do in service of him. His plans are always bigger and better than ours.